welcome to the Magic Minds podcast. I'm Matt Burke. I'm delighted to announce on today's show I have the legendary and iconic gay figure, Mr. Tonie Walsh, aka the Godfather of Gay. I'm buzzing that I got Tonie on the show. He's an absolute, genuine, lovely person. Tonie is head of the Queer Archives and he's a gay activist in Ireland. I first heard about Tonie when I listened to him on the Blind Boy podcast, and I was blown away actually by his enthusiasm and some of the information and knowledge that he shared about the gay community, and I just wanted to get him on the show, so I had a chat with him on Twitter and he agreed to come on the show, so I was absolutely delighted. The stuff that we covered in the show today, you know, was his own background coming out in Clonmel in the 60s and 70s, and also we talked about the decriminalisation of homosexuality in Ireland and the impact that has had on Ireland and society. We also touched on the epidemic of HIV in Ireland. Tonie also shared his story of contracting HIV through a rape, which was a really difficult part of the interview, and I'm delighted and honoured that Tonie would share that with us today. We also touch on other things such as society and the impact of the Queer Archives, which Tonie is head of the Queer Archives, and the impact that has on society and the gay community and its importance. And, you know, it was an absolutely brilliant interview. Tonie also talks about his own life and, you know, how he's had difficult periods in his life, and that has led him on to, you know, being such a decent human being, in my opinion. You know, as I say in the interview, only the effect it can have effect sometimes, you know. So we covered lots and lots of things. It's a really long interview, but it's genuine, it's deep, and it's honest. And as we talk about in the interview, we having real conversations about things that people don't want to talk about in public, you know, like suicides, rapes, unprotected sex, HIV, you know, recreational drugs. These things are happening in society. They're around us every day, but some people just don't want to talk about them. But we have to talk about them. You know, that's how we prevent these things from happening. That's how we stop people getting hurt. You know, we have the conversation. People are going to do them, so we have to protect them. And Tonie is a huge advocate and a beacon of light for having real conversation, and that really stood out to me in the interview, like Tonie's genuineness for having real conversation and wanting to help not just people in the gay community but everybody in society. Tonie has an interest and a care and a love for everybody in society, and he's just one of those great figures in our community. You know, he's a leader in our community, not just the gay community but in Ireland, you know, and he's a genuinely lovely person. So I was absolutely delighted to have the interview with him. Tonie also has a walking tour in Ireland, so I'd recommend that you check it out on Facebook and Twitter. He also has a show coming out, I Am Tonie Walsh, This Is Pop Baby. It's in the Project Centre in Dublin, so check that out online. I've bought tickets. I actually talk about it in the show, saying that the tickets were sold out, but they're not. It was just the early bird tickets that were sold out, but there's still some there. I just went today and bought some, so I'd ask you to check those dates out and see if they suit you and buy yourself some tickets, you and a friend. I'm sure it'll be absolutely brilliant, because I sat with him for an hour and a half of this interview, and I probably could have sat with him for longer in the interview. We had brilliant chats beforehand, we had brilliant chats afterwards. He's just a lovely person. He really is. He's genuinely lovely, and that comes across the interview, and he's a bit of crack. He's a serious bit of crack. So I'll let you sit back and enjoy the interview. Let us know what you think. As always, I'll ask you to leave your reviews on iTunes and Twitter. Let us know what you think of the interviews. Here we go. Let's listen to Tonie Walsh. Today I'm joined by a special guest, Tonie Walsh, Godfather of Gay. Tonie, what's the crack?
It's going to be a hard call trying to live up to that moniker, but I'm doing my best.
Yeah, I've read loads about you. Godfather of Gay. Is that the pinnacle of achievement?
I think it may be, according to my production company. This is Pop Baby.
Yeah, DJ, gay activist, beautiful human being, head of Queer Archive, and anything that's queer, you're all about it.
That's probably why they call me Godfather of Gay. But the funny thing is, I'll tell you something, that after 10 years of activism in the early 80s, I came out in 1979, dirt poor Dublin. BBC used to come over and use the city as a stand-in for World War II bombed London. There was so much dereliction. And dirt poor, lots of endemic homophobia, often some of it is sanctioned by the state, lots of police brutality. Was the leading periods to the Criminal Justice Act and the rowing back of like a lot of civil rights. And then there's spillover violence from the north, of course, and everything. But I came out in '79. The gay movement, liberation movement, was only 5 years old. So to a 19-year-old, I just lost my head to it. I'm going, like anything, this was full of dynamism, and it was like, we want to change society, whatever, get on board. And also it needed people, because it was just fuck all positive role models and positive images and role models at the time in pop culture or anything else. But I spent 10 years, all of my 20s, the 80s, at the coalface of gay political, social, cultural life in Dublin. And then at the end of it all, I was just burnt out, and I realised I need to go away and press other buttons. So literally went away to London, created a different life, and then came back and set myself up as a DJ, and then used my DJing club promotion work in the 90s. I mean, come back to this in a minute, but I just want to give you a quick overview. Use that as a leverage to basically indulge my other little interests. Volunteerism, working for different civil rights organisations. And the weird thing is, I don't think we can ever escape our past, because I never wanted to be known as, or see myself as, a professional queer. So that's the way I describe it.
Professional queer.
But actually, your history just catches up with you, you know, and it just come back. And of course now, because I'm still standing and I survived the AIDS crisis and everything, and I'm a wrinkly 57-year-old, basically I've lived through...
Are you 57?
Yeah.
Jesus, you look young.
Yeah, that's just Keel's toiletries, they're great. And I can afford them. But yeah, my point is that even though I wanted to get away from it, you're always drawn back. And then people just come to you. And of course, now I have the sort of status of, I'm from the second wave of gay liberation in this country. You know, I'm not the original wave. And I saw them up in Dublin Castle in June, what I call our founding brothers and sisters. People like poet Mary Dorsey, who's in her 70s, David Norris, who's 73, Hugo McManus from Trinity, some amazing people who were part of the very early 70s. And then I would have been the second wave in the late 70s. But now, of course, I'm just lumped in with all the wrinklies, okay? To the baby gays, I'm just one of these sort of elder statesmen. And I'm happy to sort of just play along with that, okay?
I love that quote, baby gays. My daughter just came out at Christmas, and I just love it, like just a little baby gay. It's so cute.
By the way, we've also added baby trans to the...
Oh, yeah?
We've added baby trans to the equation as well. Now that
we could do that, like, you know, the Baby Shark song. Baby trans, baby trans. Come here. I've asked you to go on the show. I listened to you on the Blind Boy podcast, and I was blown away by your enthusiasm. There's a certain tone to your voice. Although you're working against really tough tides and pushing things back, and everything's like the stuff you're involved with, the HIV, the Queer Archive, you say everything, and you have a tone in your voice of positivity and progression, and I just love that about you.
Thank you.
Where did that come from, or were you always a...
I think maybe some of it was being an elder child. My dad was a jazz musician, like in the big band era, the 50s and 60s, so he'd be away travelling almost every night. Letterkenny one night, Limerick the next night. And we moved, when I was 4, we moved from Rathmines down to Clonmel because he got a job down there. My mum was 24, traumatised, urbane, Dublin, Rathmines girl, going. They were still baiting the cows through the main street. Now it would be a hipster farmer's market. But back in the 60s, it was just scaldy. And she was very lonely. And I think she allowed me as an elder child to sit up late at night watching sort of some ropey dramas or whatever, Hitchcock or whatever, and having these little bonding moments with her, and basically treating me as an adult from a very early age. I think there was a combination of that and something about, you know, the way when you're a kid and you ask, what do I want to do when I'm older? What do I want to do when I grow up? And I was lying awake in bed one night about the age of 9 or 10. And I thought, I want to do lots of things. But the thing I really wanted to do was to make people happy. It was as simple as that. And I suspect now that was born out of probably seeing some shitty, horrible stuff around me. Not necessarily in my family life, but just around me. we grew up next to a psychiatric hospital in Clonmel that was originally built as a poorhouse in the 1833 and then turned into a massive psychiatric hospital, 900 beds. There were people in there institutionalized, people who had breakdowns in the 70s and 60s. The taboo of mental health was so bad that the family just forgot about them, got them away. Shocking stuff, shocking. But I used to go on Sundays as a teenager and take some of the patients to a tea dance as some little community outreach program thing. But I think I realised a couple of things. One, I was a lippy, I had a big mouth, so I was lippy. And that's handy to have. And I grew up in a family environment where I had my great-grandfather was one of the founders of the Irish Republican Socialist Party in 1917 and was involved in the lockout and everything. And then he was dissatisfied with the Irish Labour Party. It wasn't radical enough for him, so he booted off to London. He was a barrister as well. Booted off to London, won a seat for the British Labour Party in the landslide after the Second World War, stole it from the Tories and kept it until he died at the age of 80, swimming. Yeah, fucking fierce man. But I really was in awe of him as a kid. I mean, I would have been 10 when he died. And then his ex-wife was basically a suffragette and a political activist for the Irish Women's Franchise League in the interwar period. And this is how brazen she was. Her and her sister in the 1911 census. This is my great-grandmother. Her and her sister, they're 22 and 25. In the place in the census form where it says religious affiliation, instead of Roman Catholic, they put in suffragette. And I'm going, loving your attitude. Love it. And then it was crossed over, okay?
It was nice to write down.
So I think growing up, politics just came to us naturally at the dinner table. The parents who were righteous in their condemnation of social injustice. My mother was spiritual but deeply anti-clerical. She hated the misogyny of the Catholic Church. She didn't like their attitudes on sex and on women's fertility.
Wow, that's a very brave woman in those times.
No, I don't think it is. I think, well, yes and no. I actually think every generation.
I would say so.
Every generation has people. Every generation has people who are prepared to buck the trends and go, do you know what? This is wrong. I know it's wrong.
It's a rarity, though. Back in them days, come on. Like, I remember growing up in the 70s.
I think the sentiment, the attitude existed, but a lot of the time it was just hidden, and it was waiting.
Yeah.
It was waiting for somebody else to articulate it and give it legs to push it on. So I had parents who were very, like, my dad hated Charlie Haughey. This is back in the early 70s. He thought he was a Slevene. I can't describe on air the words he used to describe him, but he thought he was just a gobshite Slevene, and he was calling him out. This is long before all the drama we heard about him milking the banks and like basically living the high life and basically being a fraud essentially, and a bully. Yeah. But he already had his number, and I'm going, okay, that's so. My parents were both really politically savvy, and their parents and their grandparents. It was that culture, and then there was just something. There's something about, and maybe there's a little bit of sort of privilege in growing up, because if you've had a reasonably comfortable life, I mean, I've had awful shit. I've seen awful things happening to other people and to myself later on in life. But my childhood was quite idyllic, and I think that gave me the liberty to be able to spend some time looking at, from a very early age, looking at other people who were just a bit more miserable than I was, and seeing what I could do. You just can't say, look, it's a simple equation in society. Reach out the hand to somebody who's suffering. Reach out the hand to somebody who's more disadvantaged than you are, because you might have once been in that spot, okay? It's the old, what's the adage, the old image of like walking up the ladder, and not what some people do is they climb out of their social class, they climb out of their disadvantage, their economic disadvantage, their cultural disadvantage, and then they fucking remove the bottom of the ladder to the people who are climbing up underneath it. The Irish did it in America to the blacks after them.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Which is shocking.
Unbelievable.
Gave us a bad name, like. It really did. So I just, if I bring it all down to one simple thing is I just realised I had a talent for just making people smile and putting people out of themselves. And I think part of that is, as you grow older, then you just decide, well, how do I achieve that? And I think some of it is, apart from the alliances we make, but it all comes down, it's like the old feminist mantra, the personal is political. So I think it all comes down to that you strip all the baggage away. It's a very simple thing in life. Just be real. Be nice. Be real. Try to be as honest and as dignified as possible. We can't always, we fail sometimes. I've been a shithead to some people. There's some things I've done and said that I'm really appalled at. But overall, just want to treat people nicely and get on with it, you know. And also, here's the thing, I read a definition of an optimist, which I thought was really interesting. F. Scott Fitzgerald, who wrote The Great Gatsby. It's the only book I read in the intercert or whatever. But I read a description of an optimist that he made, and he said, you have to understand that life's utterly brutal and know what to do to improve it. So I thought, it's like the glass half full sort of analogy. So I thought, that's actually really good. I'm not sort of being positive and optimistic, and it takes work sometimes because you get depressed, you get sad, you get really sensitive about other people's humanity and the shitty, miserable, second-rate lives of people living around you and all that sort of stuff, and frustrated that maybe you can't help people enough and everything. But if you start off on the premises that, there's lots of fucking crap around the place, but I'm actually just going to do my little bit to clean it up. And make my little bit, start with your own immediate environment, and then that becomes, it's like fucking a stone into a pool. That creates these little ripples, because people get inspired by your own behaviour. If
Absolutely.
They see you just going about yourself with dignity and realness and affecting some change in your own life, people become empowered by it. It's a drug.
Unbelievable. And that just reminds me of a story I read a couple of weeks ago called Chicken Soup for the Soul by Jack Carnfield. And there's a guy going along the beach and there's loads of turtles, thousands, and your man's throwing them in one by one, and somebody came along and says to him, you're wasting your time there. And he goes, well, nah, I'm changing the life of this one. And I'm changing the life of this one.
Oh, great.
But he was looking at the whole beach covered in all these turtles, and he was like, you're not going to make any difference. You're going to make the difference this one, and throws it in, and throws it in. And I just thought, you know what, isn't that just wonderful?
Yeah.
And you know what reminded me of a story by a guy called Irvin Yalom, where he says, the reason why you do what you do, we have to be truly affected to heal. Only
we have to be truly affected to heal.
To heal others.
Oh yeah,
the healer has to be
Yeah.
affected. You know, you have to be affected to have effect, and I think that's where you came from.
Yeah, and
seeing that effect. You know what it's like to be hurt. You know what it's like to feel shit or have things done to you, and then you're able to then.
And also too. And one of the things that's always informed my activism, whether it's gay rights stuff or other types of activism, is just once we become a voice to our own worldview, once we find our voice and we can articulate it, and we can articulate it with passion and conviction and honesty, which is really important. All those things are really important because you realise that there's loads of other people who've yet to find their voice. And they need to be empowered. It's really simple. And I just figure we all have a duty in life to be really mindful of other people, helping other people to essentially find their voice. And you can use that as a sort of metaphor for just simply living or whatever. I mean, not just their literal voice.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, but just simply living, and that's really important. And that means that we have to, and I think something's really interesting is happening in Ireland at the moment, the last few years, but I think it's a society and a culture where we're refinding a sense of our collective empathy that lay buried or was forgotten about or devalued or something, or was just muddied by lots of other stuff, consumerism or whatever. But I just think that a couple of big moments really proved the worth of this. The marriage equality campaign in 2015, the Repeal the Aid campaign this year. And those two big moments have bookended 3 years where you can just sense people are frustrated, people want more, people are also and maybe because we're sloughing off our Catholicism and the rigid control of the church, people are finding their voice and their platform and sharing their stories and sharing their hurt and sharing their positivity and sharing their dreams. And that's really important, because once we have those conversations, then we build a better society. And it just seems that people are actually doing that. I just feel, I think it's a really exciting time to be alive in Ireland at the moment. Now, it's still an imperfect society, and we can have a whole list of things that we know needs to be done.
Of course.
But on the bigger macro, more abstract scale.
It's turning.
Do you not sense it?
Oh,
There is something interesting. There's a current there.
I feel people have power. I just feel that people have a power. We're not powerless. I think we're moving away. I think it was very significant to turn out for the Pope. I thought that was brilliant. I think that was the two fingers up to the Catholic Church. I thought it was brilliant. And I was like, wow, yeah, we are. We're saying no. We're going to do our own thing, and we're going to trust how we do things. I think people are getting power. Now, I don't know a lot about politics. I'm like the Joey Essex of politics. I'm fucking brutal. But what I see around me in society, I do think we're taking power back.
So here's my take on this. There are two distinct power structures. There's political power, and it's a political party system. And we have county councils and town councils and the Doyle and the Shannon. And these are what I call the shortcuts to power. They're shortcuts. You go and get elected, you become part of this machine, and that's it. And then you start, if you're doing your job right, you affect change and you make decisions that need to be made. The parallel to that, the parallel structure to that is basically civil society, NGOs, voluntary organisations, community groups, sporting groups, cultural groups, whatever. All of those other things that are actually loosely interconnected and who are also affecting their own particular change, and actually in some ways can make much more radical lasting change at a sort of grassroots level, I think, than any amount of party political shenanigans.
Joe.
And that's really important.
Excellent. Come here, talk to me. We're now at 25 years decriminalisation of homosexuality. What's your thoughts around that?
Leo Varadkar was up during Pride Week, June this year. I was up in Dublin Castle with 700 people. Lots of very elderly people there. And I was in the Doyle chamber a few days beforehand to hear Leo's speech, which was beautifully crafted. And then I was at the formal the state do, and I thought, this is really interesting. We have a gay Taoiseach who has... It's not just as his 25th anniversary. I think there was a lot more beyond the 25th anniversary. It had more power. The apology, it wasn't a formal pardon. People still have criminal records and everything, but the apology for the hurt and distress. And what was interesting, the hurt and distress that was acknowledged by society to gay men who were imprisoned, and there were many over the years. But also, and this was really interesting, to their families who were brutalised by the shame or the stigma of having a gay uncle or a gay father who was caught shagging in a toilet or whatever, and their life was ruined and all that sort of stuff. The Labour Party did a report in the penal system in the 1950s, and they found that over a third of men in Portlaoise prison were in there for consensual sexual offences. In other words, with each other. You're going, that's crazy, like, absolutely crazy.
Wow.
But there's one of the interesting things that Leo said in his speech, and it stayed with me afterwards, where he said, even in the 80s, not many men, maybe half a dozen men, 20 men, were sent to prison every year. The same laws that sent Oscar Wilde to prison. The same laws that were responsible for countless thousands of men and women leaving the country to go to more socially liberal places like San Fran or Paris or Amsterdam or Berlin or whatever, all through the 20th century. But Leo made a really interesting point, and it had to be said, that we have to acknowledge the invisible corrosive effect of the legislation. The existence of the legislation criminalised all of homosexuality, and it criminalised lesbian identity. Even though gay women weren't sent to prison, it criminalised basically their status they were sexual outlaws as well, and it legitimised a form of state terror and marginalisation. The existence of the laws legitimised anti-gay violence. It legitimised. It effectively became a form of state-sanctioned homophobia.
Wow.
Once you leave the laws and statute books, what you're saying is, no, we still regard these people as criminals, so actually we'll turn a blind eye if the police treat them like criminals and treat them like shit and they don't deserve any rights, or we'll go and beat them up on the street, or worse, we'll murder them or whatever, and we'll get away with it, like in Fairview Park, and the judge leaves these guys go, basically saying gay man's life has no value. And then you legitimise by criminalising people, then you legitimise all the other small invisible things like denying people promotion and work, or sacking somebody, or a case I had in the early 80s. I'm with my first fella and we're in a bar, it's gone now, Fives, it's where Centra is, this little indie bar. We're at a band downstairs and I'm just in love for the first time, 20, 21, holding hands, wasn't even necking. The man just came over and said, out, don't want your people in there. I don't want your people in here. As if we were travellers. And we just had to leave. Because, of course, it's the early 80s. We're still criminals. There's no anti-discrimination legislation. All that would come in the 90s. And the Equal Status Act was still a glimmer from 2000. So there's nothing here. So the criminality, the criminal status, basically, it poisoned both the state and Irish society's interaction with its sexual minorities. And if you wanted proof of how then that plays out after decriminalisation in 1993, almost immediately on the cusp of the septic tiger, if you remember, the septic tiger kicks in around 1995, and I actually think decriminalisation. Now, I'd love some academics to really try and quantify this, but I have a theory that actually decriminalisation also fed into the septic tiger. It wasn't just loads of new Irish coming back with new ideas and money after living abroad and whatever else, and then we had all of the immigrants from Eastern Europe and stuff, and then we were awash with cheap money from German banks and everything else. It was also, you had a whole new strata of creativity and culture that was enabled by just letting the gays take their place in society. And how that plays out, almost immediately from 1993, when the laws are changed, you have gay bars, gay nightclubs, you've got cultural groups being set up, you've got government pumping money into gay youth groups, which would never have happened before because it was just too taboo and it was criminal. I've got government pumping money into positive images campaigns. So there's education processes are going on. And of course, here's the rub. We're also being recognised as consumers by corporate, the corporate class to go, oh, great, we can milk you now.
No pun intended. Yeah, that's
I walked into that one.
Do you think now, 25 years after it's decriminalised, do people that are gay, lesbian, the LGBTQ, do they have respect in society?
That's a really good question. You hope that if laws are doing their job, it's the duty of government to actually, by introducing legislation, then to hope to shape societal attitudes or to lead if they're really doing their job. But of course, a lot of time in Ireland, we've either waited until we've been forced to change laws by the European Court of Human Rights or the European Commission, European Parliament. I think we're finding our voice as government, I think our political leaders have started to find their voice and to make brave decisions, like Eamon O'Riordan when he was Equality Minister before Labour were trounced, actually suggesting 3 years ago that we have safe rooms for people to actually shoot up.
Right.
And that we actually decriminalise all recreational drugs, and then we have a grown-up conversation about drug consumption, and then we roll out harm reduction strategies. And I'm going, wow, an Equality Minister and the Minister in the Department of Justice actually saying this out loud, because then the genie's out of the bottle, And in a way, he's also empowering other people who might have been thinking that, but just weren't brave enough to actually say it because they thought it was a political hot potato, and their constituents were going to go, "Are you a junkie or whatever, a druggie?" By even suggesting that we let everybody smoke hash or whatever. But I'm going, no, prohibition doesn't work. Can we have a grown-up conversation? And then you can apply that to a whole load of other things. And I've lost my track now. Going back to answer your question.
About, do you think that they've gained respect? Yeah. And what I mean on a micro level, like in the office, in the shop, in the community, in the thing.
There's something interesting here. When I was involved in the National Gay Federation in the 80s, we had a slogan on Pride Days, and one of them was, "Gay rights are simply human rights," but the other one, it's always said with me, was, "Gay liberation is your liberation." Now, this is from 1979 onwards, and I remember thinking, it's speaking to me, because I was a conceited little 19-year-old. So it's talking to me. Gay liberation, my liberation. And I thought, no, that doesn't make sense. No. It's talking to the rest of Irish society. It's talking to heterosexual men. You'll be liberated by actually, if we're going to get involved, and you can actually see a direct line. You've got women's liberation, gay liberation, heterosexual men's liberation. You know, after even things like simply decriminalisation and the normalising of gay sexuality and desire. I have straight boyfriends who identify as straight men and who insist on kissing me in the lips, who are physically intimate with me, not in a sexual way, okay, in ways that just would have been unthinkable 20 or 30 years ago.
That's cool.
Well, it's proof of people just being grown up and comfortable in their own skin.
That's
and all
fantastic.
of that. And also they've reshaped their attitudes to women along the way as well. So I think all that's happening. But I want to go back to, I got sidetracked there as I always do. One of the interesting things in the early 80s, so we had these slogans, but the gay movement was all about not just changing laws. First of all, focusing on decrim, getting decriminalisation over out of the way, and then looking at introducing equality legislation and anti-discrimination legislation, excuse me, and then educational processes. But here's the thing: it's no point changing laws unless you empower the people who are the subject of those laws and discrimination. There's no point changing them unless you've empowered those people and those constituencies to be able to take full advantage of the law change when it happens. That's because that's when the transformative effect happens in Irish society. And I think that's really important. And you see in the Irish lesbian and gay liberation movement from the early 70s onwards, there is this constant acknowledgement that actually we need to ready people for what's beyond. Because you know what happens? Government changes the law. One day you're criminal, the next day you're not criminal. It seems like nothing's changed. What's really changed is society is actually recognising you for the first time and is allowing you to take your place, your rightful place in the centre of society that has been denied you for hundreds of years. That's really important. But if you really want to make something of that, you have to be emboldened and empowered, and you have to actually understand the power of no longer being a criminal and everything else and all the benefits that flow from that. So, keeping that in mind, you'd hope that most lesbians and gay men or people who identify as bi or whatever, that they would feel Ireland is in an absolutely much better place, and it is in so many levels. And the marriage equality process was quite extraordinary because it became much more than just simply a conversation about letting the gays marry. It became an extraordinary nationwide conversation about what type of just, fair society do you want to live in, and what type of society do you want for our children. It became about that as well, which I thought was really profound. And that then fed in a few years later into the repeal thing as well, allowed women to actually talk about their personal stories, about their health care, about having had abort terminations and all the other stuff. But nothing is ever perfect. There are still people somewhere in Ireland, in cities and in the country, who are living imperfect lives, who need to be upskilled with technologies, who don't know how to use dating apps, or who are terribly lonely. And there's been loads of empirical evidence over the years and government reports and NGO reports that show that loneliness and alienation are two major factors. But I would suggest that loneliness and alienation are factors for a greying demographic wide across the board. Yeah. You know, I live down in Clonmel and I just can see it. I'm sliding towards my 60s and I don't see my social and cultural needs reflected back at me in a small town like Clonmel.
No.
Because it's still obsessed with youth culture or whatever, and blah, 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 and all that sort of stuff. And I'm going, okay, sometime the penny needs to drop, and we need to get on board with, our needs and how we want to grow older without compromising our own cultural values and everything else, If I have to go into a nursing home or something, I don't want to go into a nursing home that's actually going to be about denying the person that I am. I want to see my reflect. If I'm 70 odd and I've got dementia or something, God, hopefully, But I want to see, I'd like to think that if I'm in assisted care or whatever, that my social and cultural needs are reflected back, are acknowledged and reflected back at me, even at that stage. It's really important.
Of course.
And it's important for all of us, actually.
Absolutely.
But I think the question is really difficult to answer because, of course, it comes down to your own personal perspective.
Yeah, cool. Yeah. Do you think Leo, as a representation of the gay community, is he doing enough for them? Does he do enough?
Well, here's the thing, Leo.
You would think you have somebody in power. You have somebody.
Leo is in the unenviable position of if he does too much, he's going to actually be seen as just a single issue Taoiseach.
Okay.
And then if he does too little, of course, he's going to be upbraided for that as well. So I think he's always walking a fine line. I am going to say this without, and I don't intend it to sound patronising, but like Simon Harris, who's growing into the job, I actually think he's growing on his feet, And there are times when I'm appalled at some of the personal vindictive stuff I see on Twitter and in other social platforms that's directed at Leo, because I'm going, okay, I have a major problem with a lot of his political ideologies. He's a little neo-Thatcherite and whatever. But at the same time, everybody is allowed a chance to grow and to find themselves. And you also have to recognise that he came out rather late in the day as a gay man. Now, I used to subscribe to the idea that your gayness actually automatically made you a socialist and a feminist, and you were like down with the oppressed and everything else because you'd worked through your own sort of system, your own system of oppression and everything. Yeah. But of course, it doesn't play out like this. You see, I'm appalled sometimes when you see gay men and women who are arch Trump supporters or something, or they think Margaret Thatcher is like the bee's knees, and I'm going, how on earth did that happen?
Yeah.
But I think there are much more interesting people in government to watch. I think Catherine Sapone, as an out proud lesbian and a middle-aged lesbian, as Minister for Youth and Family, is extraordinary. Because given gay youth sexuality was criminalised up until 1993, but youth sexuality in general in this country was always simply sidelined. And a lot of that had to do with church attitudes and sex, and also because we just simply don't recognise youth in their own right, or historically we haven't. We haven't either seen them as teenagers, as young adults, or whatever else. And of course, when it comes to sexuality, we're in denial about the fact that maybe kids, especially now with digital platforms and access to porn and everything, the kids might be having sex at 10 or 11 or 12, and girls are having their periods at fucking 9 or whatever, which they are, mainly because they're overweight or whatever, and it's triggering all of that.
Absolutely, great stuff. Point.
Yeah, but I just think I think it's amazing. I think there's something really subversive and fabulous about having a Minister for Youth and Family who's an out proud lesbian. And she anchored instituted an LGBTI youth strategy, which was launched from the ARC, the Children's Cultural Centre in Temple Bar, during Pride Week this year in Dublin. And it turns out it's the first for Ireland, it's the first in the world, an LGBTI youth strategy that involved her department going around the country over 2.5 years and interviewing 4,000 kids from the ages of 12 up to 18 or something, or 21, interviewing 4,000 kids, then interviewing NGOs and other groups in civil society, and then also talking to government departments. And from all of that, bringing it all together and framing it into a load of proposals about what needs to be done to basically acknowledge queer youth sexuality. And I'm going, this is actually extraordinary.
That's quite cool.
Yeah, and the beautiful thing is, it's all coming from the kids themselves, actually. Basically, giving them a voice and empowering them to say, what do you need us to do to actually improve your life, and all that sort of stuff.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Do you think... I'm going to get on to the career arc of it. Do you think it's easier for kids coming out? My daughter came out at Christmas or like that, and she came out and it went away pretty quick. Like, there wasn't any haboo. I don't know, it's just, because of the family we have or where we are. Just, she was cool about it. There was no hullabaloo. And I said, I hope that's transferable across the country for kids. I hope it's easy for them. I know it's not, and I probably just living in a fancy land. Is it easier for kids to come out right now?
Loads of kids don't even have to go through the process of coming out.
Right.
They were just always out.
Yeah? Or maybe then it's just me. I actually, the fact of coming out, I hate that.
Belong To, which is the national.
I know a girl that works for them.
A queer youth organisation, Belong To.
Yeah.
And the letters spell out bisexual, lesbian, gay, trans. They get major funding from the state. They have been doing sterling work around queer youth sexuality since they were founded 15 years ago, whatever. But recently they've discovered a new phenomenon where they have parents knocking on the door going, we think our child is lesbian or gay. This is before the child is even recognised as themselves.
Right.
And the parents are rocking up to Belong To going, well, what do we do and can you help us or whatever? And what they're finding is the age of kids actually becoming aware of their sexuality and being determined is getting younger and younger and younger, because it's always there, like it's there from birth or whatever, but then it's some point when you go into puberty and everything, all of that kicks in. And now we live in a society that's able and generous enough to sort of give you a space to recognise that, because historically, like, I knew I was gay from about the age of 8 or 9. I didn't have a language or words for it. Not in the 70s.
Yeah.
You just didn't see the word gay bandied about,
No, yeah.
And actually, the Evening Herald used to use the word gay in inverted commas up until 1989, as if sort of gay is some, like, alien concept, going, let us use the fucking words, okay? There are fucking terms, okay? Don't be denying us our fucking labels,
Yeah. Would you like to see that term banished then, coming out?
Oh, here, listen, I just think... labels are reductive.
Coming out, yeah. I don't even...
Not just coming out, but I think even... I have a massive problem with the word straight. I'd rather use the clinical term heterosexuals or hetero, because I think actually, first of all, the opposite of straight is bent, and I don't particularly feel bent.
That's an 80s one. Oh, he's bent.
Yeah, it's such an old
Queer.
Dublin thing. But the other thing is, I just think it limits a lot of heterosexual people because I have heterosexual friends who are queer. Their cultural sensibility is queer. They've decided not to have kids, or they live different types of lifestyles from their parents did, and they're living in trios, or they've got alternative family arrangements. Heterosexual men and women now, totally. And I just think these labels no longer, they're not fit for purpose. And also too, there was that period in the early noughties where gay became this abusive term, a bullying term in the class yard and everything. That's so gay. And I'm going, Jesus wept. We've spent decades finding a word, because it grew out of 1920s jazz in New York. That's when the word gay first became associated with homos. So we found this word term. It's our own term, and it's positive and everything else. And then after all this time, the little bullies, school bullies, have turned it back, have put an edge of violence and shame and marginalisation back into it. I'm going, do you know what? Give me the word queer or something. If I'm going to be stuck with a label, I no longer want to be identified as a gay man. I'm over this. But actually, I just think, labels redundant. We shouldn't really need them.
Yeah. I was take
it's
it back
a little bit like, I'll give you an example, like clubs I used to do in the 90s, one of my bugbears was looking at the flyer, they'll go, gay friendly. And I'm going, if you really need to put that in the flyer, you're on a losing streak. Because actually, the group of people you have running the club and their personalities and mix should be enough to encourage the type of people you want without having to say, hey, we're wearing it on our sleeve and we're really cool about making it a mixed night or whatever. I'm going, oh, please leave it out.
What is the Queer Archive? Talk to me about that.
So, the Queer Archive, it's started off in the early 70s with activists and organisations just collecting stuff, news clippings, from all of the national newspapers, North and South, and provincial newspapers, and then consumer titles like Hot Press or In Dublin Magazine, Total Dublin, whatever. Image. And over the years, an enormous amount of material is amassed. Reports and theses and books and videos, audio, and clippings. And then a lot of it was managed by the National LGBT Federation, which I was very involved in the 80s. And it's one of the oldest and largest queer, let's call it the Queer Corporation, civil rights organisation. And it had the resources, the economic and human resources, to basically put a lot of money into doing this. News clipping is really important because you're following stuff in the press. You can monitor how the press is actually covering stories, the language it uses, the baiting that would go on or whatever else, or just some sleazy stories, that, for example, in the 70s, you rarely read positive stories about gay people. And they were almost invisible. Sometimes the lack of stuff, even in the early Pride parades in Dublin, no reporting in the newspapers. You're going, hold on a second, 150 people have just walked down O'Connell Street for the first time ever in Irish history, screaming their heads off about being proud to be gay, and the papers just ignore it. Which tells you something, the omission tells you something. Anyway, so over the years, all of this built up. And in the mid-90s, I approached the National LGBT Federation and said, you've got all this stuff in black plastic bags. I'm familiar with a lot of it. We need to do something with it. And at that point, it was called the National Gay and Lesbian Archive. It was being used by GCN as a research tool. And I said, listen, I'm going to get some librarians together, professional librarians. We're going to put some form on all this stuff, and we're going to open an office from St. William Street, and open an office that's available to journalists, students, undergrads, postgrads, researchers, whatever.
Fantastic.
And once you sort of legitimize that, then more people feel, oh, I want to give you stuff. I'm clearing out my attic, and I've got all these old copies of Gay Times or whatever, or I've got some programs from something, or posters or club flyers or whatever, or stickers. Like, for example, somebody phoned me up one day and said, oh, I've just seen an amazing sticker on a lamppost out in Dunleary. I said, what is it? He says, somebody's got one of these little rubber stamp kits, and they've handmade a little rubber stamp in red ink on a tiny little label, and it says, hang faggot Norris. I said, I want that. And can you take a photograph of it on the lamppost as well, so we can actually have a reference to where you found it? Wow. Just stuff like that's quite amazing, like social ephemera, I suppose, and like club flags.
At a human level, that's horrible and disgusting.
Oh, well, it's that as well, and of course, it's one of the reasons to actually collect it. Like the Linenhall Library in
that really struck me. That's
the
fucking
Linenhall
horrible.
The Linenhall Library in Belfast, in Donegal Place, has one of the best archive collections of the Troubles and the political process, and they collected stuff that was actually considered subversive, like posters from the IRA and posters from the UVF and stuff. And they actually have anti-bomb controls in this and high security in the library and archive, but they actually have, some of the stuff is deeply offensive and ropey, but they felt it was their job to fucking archive all this stuff and remind people of it, and also use it as educational tools or whatever. So anyway, the mid-90s, I'm working part-time on all this, and the word queer was having a bit of a moment. Queer as Folk was on British TV, and it was just entering the lexicon in a positive way. And I said, you know what, the National Gay and Lesbian Archive doesn't really describe it, because actually it's bigger than that, and there's loads of stuff about trans identity into it. So what are we going to call that? And don't going to call it the National LGBT Archive. It's a mouthful. There's also lots of stuff about women's sexuality and Irish sexuality in general. I mean, at its core, it's about gay and lesbian identity, but there's a lot of other stuff. Like Colm Tobin, the writer, said you can't write a history of late 20th century Ireland without referencing the archive. He says all our histories are in there, collected. And some of it's down to the stuff that people collected. Like when in the early days, I would just collect a lot of stuff that I just felt was really relevant to conversations that on the first reading, you're going, oh, what's the gay and lesbian connection here? But then you realise, actually, this is just the other side of the coin. And it's part of a bigger sort of discourse around human sexuality or whatever. So anyway, I decided to rename it the Irish Queer Archive, which got me into trouble. Anytime I go out with David Norris now, he still bitches me for using the word queer. He said, oh, in the 1950s when I was growing up, queer was a really pejorative, offensive term. And I'm going, well, it isn't anymore, so get with the programme.
I think it's quite cool.
But because also, and here's the distinction, you'll get it, but people need to understand, we're not just talking about sexuality, we're talking about cultural sensibility as well. And queer covers cultural sensibility, otherness, and I like that. And I also think, too, it's really important that we take words that historically have been used to hurt us or have an import of violence behind them or whatever, and they're disabling, to find a way to disable that violence, to find a way to disable the hurt, their capacity to hurt, and to find a way to reframe those words as positive descriptors. That's really important. So the archive was hosted in a storage facility for ages, and then the National LGBT Federation started having conversations with different organisations around the country and realised, okay, we need somebody with a deep pocket. We have to preserve. So we have 250,000 press clippings going back to the 1960s. Every mention of homosexuality in the Irish media. We've got reports. We've got thousands of posters and flyers and photographs and a whole lot of other stuff. And pride T-shirts and whatever. And this stuff needs to be preserved. And it needs to be exploited as an education resource, as a research resource and everything else. So we struck gold. We had conversations with the National Library, and the National Library said, yeah, we want to take it off you. Now, ideally, I would have loved, my wish list was for somebody to give me 50 million and go, there's a beautiful building, we'll put in the climate controls and everything else, and you can have your conservation, and you can have a public office and a little amphitheatre for public meetings and film shows or talks or whatever else. And it's a research facility that's available to everyone. But actually, in some ways, the state, when the National Library took it, I think there was something really powerful about the idea of the state taking ownership of queer heritage. The state taking ownership, because again, it felt like we recognised this is really an important part of your history. It's also an important part of our wider history. You know, we were having this conversation in 2016, for example. I talk about it on my walking tours. I stop outside the Royal College of Physicians on Kildare Street, and I say, this is the home of Dr. Kathleen Lynn, who was second in command in City Hall when James Connolly got shot. And she was the woman who set up St. Ultan's Children's Hospital in 1919. She's basically feminist, lesbian, and revolutionary. And her feminism grew out of her republicanism. That's what's really classy. She sets up Ireland's first children's hospital at a time when infant mortality was shite. The tenements and everything you can imagine, like the 1910s.
Yeah. Jesus.
And women's fertility was shite as well, even though the Rotunda was doing their best they can. And she lived openly with her lover, Madeleine French Mullen, for over 30 years. So all during that period, up until, I think Dev came to her funeral. But they just sort of like, her sexuality was accepted within certain circles, okay? But here's the thing. She was just airbrushed out of all of the formal historical narratives around 1916 and the foundation of the state, what I call the liberation myths of the founding of the Irish state. If you weren't Roman Catholic, if you weren't male, and if you didn't fit a certain sort of picture of Irish identity, sorry, there was no room for you. So
airbrushed out.
Literally, like Nurse O'Farrell, the woman who with Pádraig Pearse in the photographs, who's presenting the letter of surrender, they literally cut her boots out. If you know the photograph, it's a side-on photograph of Pearse.
Yeah.
And the nurse is beside him, and you can just make out her shoes or boots, and they're presenting the letter of surrender to the British commander or whatever else. Later on, it didn't suit the liberation myths of 1922. So they literally took her out of most of the photographs. A few survived original photographs, but they took her out, one, because she's a bloody woman. Secondly, she was actually a lesbian. We finally made up for it 100 years later during the 2016 celebrations, where An Post released a stamp, and I love this. Nurse Elizabeth O'Farrell is on one half the stamp, and Dr. Kathleen Lynn is on the other half. They would have been mates, they weren't lovers, just looking at each other and going, two lesbian revolutionary iconic figures from 1960 finally getting their day in the sun, finally being recognised for like the sacrifice they made and everything that they did to like help us become an independent country and everything. So it's never too late. We're finally making up for it, you know.
Absolutely class.
Yeah. And all her papers about how she set up St. Ulstan's, but also all her papers about her personal papers, about her life with her lover, are actually in the Royal College of Physicians, which is quite remarkable, actually. So, yeah, so I think we're now post sort of law reform and post decriminalisation, post marriage equality, and all this sort of stuff, and the normalisation of queer sexuality. I think the next really important thing is cultural heritage. You know, you've got a gay daughter. At some point, you want to be able to have stories with her. She's going to be curious. And here's the funny thing. Gay people, unlike all other minority groups, don't have traditional heredity. As a community, we don't have traditional parent-child links. That's not the way it works. It works for every other minority.
Well, you're at the top of her family tree. You're the godfather. When she looks back, she's like, there's Tony Walsh. She's my great godfather.
But you can be her literal father. Yeah. But to be at that point, not that you're not doing your job, I think you can do your job even better by actually being informed. If you've got tools at your fingertips and you've got stuff like the Irish Queer Archive and you've got people making use of it, there have been over 30 lesbian and gay periodicals printed on the island of Ireland since 1974. Over 30. Some of them only last for half a dozen issues or whatever. They're all fascinating snapshots of Irish society at any given time.
Wow.
Yeah, and they're all preserved there. And I'm going, all this stuff is really important in terms of looking at how people lived their lives, the conversations people were having. All that stuff's really important. It's really important. Panty made a really good point. She was talking to all the baby gays in Merrion Square at the end of the Pride Parade, and she said, listen, it's fabulous seeing so many gorgeous young people here today, but do you know where you came from? Because if you don't know where you came from, you're sure as hell aren't going to really make the most of where you are right now, and you'll never know where you're going in the future. Okay, so after today, I want you to go home and Google Declan Flynn. I want you to go home and Google the Hirschfeld Centre. I want you to go home and Google, and she's listing out all these old Irish gay, lesbian historical references, and I'm going, fair point, you know.
Wow, that is brilliant.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Here's one for you, and it really struck me when you talked on the Blind Boy podcast, was about HIV in Ireland and the increase of it. Is it one every 18 hours?
15 or 18 hours is quite shocking.
I couldn't believe it.
Yeah.
To me, as somebody, my knowledge of health is huge in comparison to my politics knowledge, and as a health advocate and interest, to me that's an epidemic.
Yeah,
it
is, and
crazy.
There's also the shocking thing is that in the early days of the AIDS crisis, we, unlike many other countries, we had a huge IV drug use. We did a major cohort of AIDS sufferers in Ireland. And gay and bisexual men were the second largest cohort. And it seemed back in the 80s that the gay community was much better prepared and armed to deal with the AIDS crisis. We knew what was coming down the line. We were watching developments abroad. We were campaigning to get information leaflets out to educate people and whatever else, and to do harm reduction and whatever else. And I just think there's a shocking paradox and irony to the fact that now gay men of all ages, young and old, are now the single biggest demographic of new infections. And we fail to think, just because HIV is no longer, if you adhere to antiretroviral therapies like I have for the past 9 years, I'm no longer infectious. I'm going to come back to this in a second. So here's the thing. we're no longer infectious, which is really liberating, not just in terms of like how we negotiate desire and intimacy and everything, but in terms of removing shame and stigma and all of that sort of baggage that attaches itself to it. But we still don't fess up to the enormous social, personal and economic cost of HIV. Nobody should be willingly putting themselves at risk or putting other people at risk of HIV infection, because it's a lifelong disease. Like diabetes, you have to take pills that are expensive to stay paid for it every single day for the rest of your life, and it doesn't come without its problems. You know, especially as you get older. There's a whole... Like, I go for my 6 monthly checkups to James's, the Guy Clinic, and they do everything. Lipids, cholesterol. I mean, I get superior healthcare. The irony is, I think actually my POS status gives me even better healthcare if I wasn't POS. Because they're also just checking up on the efficacy of the drugs to make sure that everything's okay, and I'm taking the drugs, and if there's any side effects and all this sort of stuff.
When were you diagnosed with it?
So here's the thing. I was diagnosed I'd just broken up with a boyfriend, and I went out and got very messy for a while, and I basically had sex with a guy who raped me. And
Jesus.
I was 45, and I'd spent all of my life, well, most of my life, using rubbers. And basically fucked me without a rubber. I got really, really sick afterwards. I don't mean immediately, like weeks, months later. I knew, this is hepatitis or HIV, and rocked up to James, and I'll never forget it, because I just knew, and I said to the nurse, and they tested me, and then they called me back, and I said, yeah, what's the result? She said, yeah, you're positive. And I was just shocked and annoyed and pissed off that I was 45 and it was becoming, because I've lost loads of friends to AIDS as well, and I've survived the AIDS crisis. I'm going, how the fuck did I get positive at 45 years of age? I'm not a really good advertisement for safer sex, getting positive at 45, even though accidents happen and everything else, and I felt a little bit ashamed about that as well. But I remember James's insisted I see a counsellor, which is standard procedure, and I'm in there with the counsellor, just looking on my watch going, I'm bloody well late for work, trying to patronise the counsellor. And she's going, are you okay, Tonie? Is everything all right? And she's being very earnest. And I'm going, think to myself, can I just get the fuck out of here, please, and get back to work? Like, I'm over it. Okay, I'm just going to have to deal with this. And there's part of me, numb resignation and angry, but also going, what the fuck? And I remember leaving James's and going down to the Lewis stop. And I just had this urge to scream to everybody at the Lewis stop that I was HIV positive. And I thought, okay, better not for now. But then I thought, a few weeks later, when I'd finally got over it, I thought, okay, I just need to talk about this and sort of normalise it. And in a way, when we talk about it and we normalise it, it removes, we have to do our best just to remove... AIDS is a really interesting thing, HIV and AIDS, because, and I suppose you could say this about all STIs, but particularly HIV and AIDS. If you look at it, whatever way it jumped species from monkeys back in the day and everything else, but unique amongst loads of infectious diseases, it comes with this superior baggage of shame and transgressiveness and criminality. Because who were the first people to get it? Sex workers, the drug users, the homos, criminals, low-life scumbags, basically.
You guys started.
Yeah. Now, then, of course, eventually it's sort of...
mainstream.
It mainstreams. Yeah.
Like, but it's all because
we were just the early adapters, the early adapters. But so here's the thing. I think traditionally it has come so comprehensively wrapped up in this bubble of stigma, criminality, taboo and everything, that we have found it historically very difficult to separate all that and go, look, can we just deal with this and go, it's a chronic lifetime condition. It's like having diabetes. You go and get your checkups, you sort out the drugs, blah, 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 and then you start looking after yourself. And can we just move on to something else, please? And get rid of all that sort of stuff.
That's some attitude, Tonie.
But here's the thing. PrEP is actually, in a way, pre-exposure prophylaxis, which is basically, if you think about taking going on the pill or something before you have sex. This is basically a pill that you take if you know that you might potentially be putting yourself at risk of infection. That you take this pill and it stops you from becoming infected. It's the next best thing to a vaccine, and it came around. It started to evolve in the last few years, just around the time that what health professionals were noticing, and I found in my case, was that if you adhered to your antiretroviral treatment and you filled certain criteria, you were no longer the illness was undetectable. It's buried somewhere in your body. The virus. It's a sneaky little virus, buries itself in the bones or somewhere in your blood, and then it's waiting, lying dormant, but it's basically inactive. Okay, as it's been suppressed, and because it's been suppressed, you can no longer infect somebody. And the first time my medic said this to me, and she said, you can technically go out and have unprotected sex and fuck somebody and not infect them. And I'm going, oh my God, this is a game changer. Not that I want to go out and have unprotected sex, but I'm going, this is a real game changer in terms of removing all that last culture of shame and stigma attached to it.
Would it lead
because
to
it liberates you to go... Because to tell you the truth, the early days of me becoming infected, I stopped having sex for a while because I was so obsessively worried about potentially putting somebody else at risk of infection, even when I'm having safer sex. And I'm going, do you know what? It's too much of an effort to even bother getting my end away here. Let's just forget about it for another night.
Okay.
And all that. So I actually think PrEP is going to be a game changer. And also, anywhere that's been rolled out with sufficient demographics where they can actually make a study of it, it's led to corresponding decreases in new infections of HIV. And here's the other thing is, on a crude economic level, it's cheaper to give everybody bloody PrEP, which is 80 to 100 quid a month, than put people on a lifetime of antiretroviral pills. Like, I take one pill a day. It costs the state €43 per pill every day. And then factor in long-term health care where I get some other problems later down the line as a result of aging, but also as a result of just toxicity to the drugs I'm on anyway, because that's what eventually happens. All these things are, you get risk of heart disease or whatever. So I just think we need to be talking about PrEP more. We need to be advancing it and making, as Michael D. Higgins said on World AIDS Day last year, he said, it's not good enough for the government to just go, yeah, we'll make it legal, and because up to last year people were illegally importing it, and sometimes customs were even stopping it under using the argument of quality control or whatever else and everything else. Whatever. But people were just simply trying to do the right thing and empower themselves or whatever and be responsible in their sexual behaviour. But I'm going, no, roll it out and make it affordable and accessible to the people who need it, and also embed its rollout in a much better and more comprehensive, straight up, honest information campaign just around sexual responsibility. Because we're still not having that conversation. Mm-hmm. We still haven't dealt with teenage pregnancies. We still haven't dealt with people getting chlamydia or getting gonorrhea or syphilis or hepatitis C, and all those
STIs are on the rise. Huge, aren't they? They're huge in Ireland.
Well, here's the thing. I actually think...
Would PrEP, but issuing PrEP, I sound like an Elwyn or something now. Would PrEP lead to more people being more promiscuous? Well, is that a bit of a...
I think that's the argument. It's a really...
Like, I'm grand.
It's a really reductive argument. Here's the thing. It's an argument that's been used by people to basically legitimise not rolling it out. And I actually think it's a nonsense, because actually, if you think about it, if you're giving somebody PrEP and they agree to do it... I know people who've been on PrEP trials here, gay and straight. Here's the thing. If you're taking PrEP, you have to go back and get monitored regularly, on a regular basis. Yeah. Okay. So what happens is you're actually taking much better control of your sexual behaviour, and you're on it when it comes to just being a lot more aware, bodily integrity, a lot more aware about disease and avoiding disease, or if you do pick up something, getting it sorted.
Yeah.
And then making sure that anybody else that you might have sex with then I get it sorted as well. And treating it like as if you're going to the dentist or something. And
absolutely.
Come on, like.
Yeah, absolutely. Come here, here's something for you. And I work with people with disabilities and brain injury, and it's all, we talk about disclosure, like disclosing to a partner, whatever, have brain injury. Did you have difficulty around that with your HIV? Did you was there always a part where you go, will I tell them, will I not? Or what way do you handle that? If you don't ask, that's a bit personal. I'm sorry.
Sometimes it depended what we were going to end up doing. There were a couple of people I never told, and then it seemed like every time I went about telling somebody in the early days, it just became this huge emotional drama spent out. And then in a way you're also setting up other people to then have the fear or whatever. So I thought the best way to do it is to just come out in the open and tell everybody I'm positive. And at one point, one of our brothers says, do you really think that's a good idea? I said, well, do you know what? I own it then. And not only that, I'm over it. There's more important things in the world. Do you think that everyone's obsessing about my health status? There are really more important things in the world, okay? And if I'm just going to go, yeah, I'm positive, so what? Next. It's going to empower somebody else to just simply normalise their own health condition. I was a bit cheeky one day. I said to somebody, you know what? If it's a choice between HIV and diabetes, I'd rather have HIV. Diabetes is a curse, okay? You get sagging tits by the time you're 50 odd or whatever else. No, give me HIV any day. It's a little bit more glamorous.
Has it reduced your ability to get some extra loving, has it?
But no, I had an amazing conversation with a friend of mine, and we had sex not long after I became positive, and then it was interesting and friendly and horny, but there was just something missing from it. And then years later, a long time later, recently, I'm no longer infectious, and he knows that, and we ended up in bed together one night, and we had amazing sex. And afterwards, we're lying in bed, and I looked at him and said, why wasn't it like this back in the day? And then we ended up talking about the fears and anxieties that we bring. Both of us have this disorders. Me worried about infecting him worried, is everything going to be really safe? How safe is safe? Because actually there's no such thing as safe sex. There's safer.
Yeah. I was talking to a microbiologist and he said that to me.
Safer sex.
That's
the distinction.
It's never. The only way to be 100% sure is just keep it in your trousers.
Everything.
Keep your trousers on.
Everything has a risk. And what we do is we evaluate those risks in our behaviour with everything we do, not just around sex, but whatever else. But yeah, I actually think I put up something for World AIDS Day on Facebook that, oh my God, I was messaged from people all around the world. Basically, I called it my AIDS manifesto. I'm in a photograph, and there's a little essay, a short essay. It's only about 500 words, short of 300 words. But the photograph is me holding a board that says HIV positive, so what? And I just talk about how we lost so many people to the war, how we're still losing people. There's 30 million children have been orphaned in Africa. 30 million children.
Heartbreaking, isn't it?
And you're going, there are people still dying. There are people still dying of AIDS in Ireland, by the way. You just don't hear about it.
Yeah, it's shocking. It's shocking. That leads me on then to the AIDS memorial that you're involved in. Talk to me about that.
So the AIDS memorial is an idea that I just thought maybe I'm getting older, and something recently made me reconnect with my past in the 80s and 90s, the war from 84 till 97, 6, when antiretrovirals came in and people stopped dying, more or less, in Ireland. And I lost a huge amount of friends and lovers in my 20s, and I just didn't, and I was like everybody, gay and straight, was traumatized by the experience. I went up to Rialto, St. Andrew's Community Centre in Rialto last year, and they have a World AIDS Day ceremony every year, and they light candles, and they call out the names of their community who died from AIDS, a lot of it as a result of drug abuse. And at one point they listed the names of 2 brothers and their father, 3 people in the family destroyed by this horror. And I actually think it's a period in our recent Irish history where we've yet to get on board with it. actually just simply it caused so much harm, and it was full of taboo, and it was an awful period. And also, we just, gay and straight, inner city communities ravaged by it, shocking waste of life, people being snatched, their lives destroyed at the age of 23 or 24 or whatever. The human cost, the social cost, people buried their grief, people tried to develop some coping mechanisms and survival strategies to just get on with the horror. Imagine, you're in your 20s and you imagine dancing, as the way I put it, dancing into a bright future with all your mates, only to find them one by one, relentlessly dying, horrible, brutal, shabby deaths, and going, this is not normal. And the only other analogy is in a war where this sort of happens. And even then what happens, you suffer post-traumatic stress disorder afterwards, If you're lucky, they actually treat you for that. But here, we've never even acknowledged. So there's no memorials. There's been the cultural responses, like TV programs and films and documentaries and books and memoirs of the period. There's only a handful of them. It's as if we were so deeply traumatized by this. And again, because going back to this cloud of criminality and taboo and everything, it came with all this other baggage that we just buried it. But like dead bodies, they eventually turn up. And at some point, we have to deal with it. And we have to deal that there are people like me, people worse than me actually, I call the walking wounded. There are people who have been brutalized by that experience. Men, women, young, old, gay and straight were brutalized by it, losing their husband or wife, losing one of their kids, losing two of their kids, losing their lover, whatever. And society not recognizing that loss. Society not helping those people find the language to deal with the loss and to actually modulate their grief and their anger at the fact that people were allowed to die in awful, awful circumstances, with like in a sort of culture that was like plague containment. Susan Sontag, the American philosopher writer, she actually wrote a book called AIDS as a Metaphor, and she described society's response around the world to it as something like how society dealt with bubonic plague back in the Middle Ages, and the culture of fear and terror and exclusion and public health containments and everything else. Nuts. People behaved really fucking badly. It's shocking. I knew some people who, when they saw somebody who was in the last stages of AIDS and they're being wheeled in a wheelchair down Grafton Street or something, they actually walked over to the other side of the street to avoid having any sort of face-to-face with this person who was ravaged with KS lesions or whatever, they were obviously an AIDS victim or whatever, skeleton and everything else.
Jesus.
So there's all of that. So I think there's a huge amount of hurt and suffering, and not just my own. And also, I want to remember the people who died, because what is remembered lives. I want them remembered. In the same way that we remember the heroes of 1916, we remember people who died in the wars, we remember people who died in Enniskillen, we remember people who died in the Dublin bombings. We carve their names onto a monument, and we have flower, we lay wreaths every year, or we have public talks, and we have educational processes. And I'll come back to the power of that. So I actually think we need to stitch that experience back into our Irish history narrative, and to be able to start talking about it again and to bring these people alive again. But more importantly, in doing so, we need to acknowledge how people survived the period. Carers, family people, how they survived. Because actually the coping mechanisms and survival strategies of that generation can actually be, once we actually take them on board and we understand them and we celebrate them and we see them for what they are, we can apply them to other new situations we find ourselves in today that are slightly different around. It doesn't even have to be around sexual health, but in this case it is sexual health we're talking about. But we could apply it to something else, just simply how to survive brutalizing times. That passing on of wisdom and lived experience is really, really important. And here's the other thing. I just think you build a monument, whatever the monument is, a physical totem, or a little grove in a Merrion Square or something, and there's a physical bronze monument or a slab of stone or whatever. I always see these monuments as things, they're like transmitters of history. they echo with stories if they're doing their job right. People can come to them and they can grieve passively for everything that they've lost, but then actually the monuments, their very existence and the way we use them, then allow us to tell stories of survival and of hope. And that's really important for new generations. And then that feeds in, if it's doing its job, it has consequences. It feeds into educational processes. It feeds into allowing us to have conversations about being more responsible and growing up to each other, not putting each other in harm's way or whatever, and doing right by people when it comes to risky behaviour or whatever else. Knowing, if we're going to go out on the batter and do loads of drugs and alcohol, that we shouldn't be engaging in risky sex or whatever, all that sort of stuff. So I actually think the power of a physical monument can be really good in that. Does that make sense?
Yes, yeah. Absolutely. Wow.
And also it's just time. It's about bloody time. They're building AIDS memorials all over the world now.
I think as you said,
even
in
Russia,
the beacon.
And I just think, and also too, you look at somewhere like, especially in Dublin, it's not just remembering the people who died, but it's remembering their stories and also scraping beneath the surface to talk about wider things, why people even got AIDS in the first case. Now, I don't mean about creating a hierarchy of victimhood.
No.
But here's the thing. We still don't acknowledge. Buckingham Street has a little bronze memorial, the eternal flame in bronze up there, to people who died of IV heroin and methadone abuse. It's the only monument I know in the city centre to people whose community was ravaged by AIDS. Okay, we need to also look at the victims, and they were victims of AIDS, and the lives they led. And in many cases, one of the things that they universally have in common is you've got groups of people drawn from various parts of Irish society who are living marginalised, in many cases, shitty lives. They didn't even have access to proper health care, which of course is what happens in Africa today, or they can't afford expensive antiretroviral therapies or whatever, or some dodgy religious beliefs get in the way of them just simply being responsible to each other and everything else,
Yeah, wow.
Like the church preventing us from using condoms and saying it's better to let people die because actually if you let people use condoms, it prevents life. And you're going, well, that's really twisted. Really, I actually was involved in a condom picket outside the Vatican Embassy on the Navan Road. 4 of us, this is like about 87, so condoms were still illegal. 4 of us went off to the Apostolic Nunciature, it's called. So the Vatican Embassy. So we rock up and we have little placards that say things like Cardinal Ratzinger, the future Pope Benedict. Cardinal Ratzinger, out, and my best one was protect yourself from the church, wear a condom. And then we gave out rubbers to all these bemused 5th and 6th formers who were sheepishly passing up and down from school and going, what's all this about? And you're going, yeah, do you want some? And technically we're breaking the law by even giving out the rubbers, but we inflated a load of Johnnies and made a necklace of them and put them over the entrance gates to the church.
Oh,
fuck you. The church still today, the Catholic Church still says won't allow for condom use.
It's fucking nuts, isn't it?
It's
like
totally. That is, and it's that sort of, it's that dodgy religious morality and ideology that's fed into the type of behaviour we see in parts of the world, like in Africa, where people use their conservative religious beliefs to legitimise engaging in risky behaviour, or to just simply not modify their behaviour, and do something responsible by using rubbers or whatever. It's just shocking, like.
You're an absolute hooligan. Come here, talk to me. I am Tonie Walsh, the gay godfather. What is this show? I think it starts on the 29th of November, is it? It's sold out at the moment. I'm trying to get tickets through.
It's not sold out.
I was looking online today, someone said it's sold out.
You're kidding me.
That's great, isn't it?
Oh, this is a first, okay? We're breaking it on this podcast. Oh my God.
As far as I said, it was sold out. What is it and what? Tell us about it.
So first of all, it's being produced by, this is Pop Baby, who've major form in this area. They've worked with Tara Flynn, they've worked with Panties, One Woman shows. They've done Riot, which is, for anyone who hasn't seen what Riot is, it was in the complex It was part of actually, no. Riot is like an amped-up music hall variety show with snazzy dancing, stand-up comedy, savage satire, rap, drag, music, everything in the mix, and it's all embedded in a really honest, contemporary attitudinalising about Dublin and Irish society right now. And it's no surprise that Culture Ireland think it's one of our best exports, because it's just grown legs and it's happening all around the world. At some point or other, it's in Sydney or it's in Toronto or it's in New York or whatever. So this is Pop Baby. They did the cultural sidebar to St. Pat's Festival this year called Where We Live, which was really important in terms of, it was conversations, it was art installations, it was music, performance in the complex. This, you probably know it, but lots of people don't. Basically, it's an old warehouse in Smithfield near Golden Square.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, amazing. And of course, what was lovely was they repurposed the space, a temporary culture space, and they're really important. Maybe that's where they got the name, but it's really important to have these spaces that will allow for stuff that's not necessarily commercial mainstream concerns, where we can have urgent conversations about what type of society we want in Dublin. Can we have conversations about the housing crisis? Can we have social satire when we can platform stuff that just doesn't get a look at anywhere else?
Brilliant. So
they have form in this Pop Baby, and Jenny Jennings is my producer. Philly McMahon, who's a celebrated playwright, is my co-writer, and we have Tom Creed, who's actually now touring with Opera Ireland and the Tales of Hoffman. He's my director, and it's going up for a week's run in the project at the end of November. And actually, what's really beautiful, initially I thought November, oh my God, it's a dead month. It's going to be a hard act getting people to buy tickets, because it's a 75-minute one-man show. And really, basically looks at social change in Ireland and political change in Ireland over the last 40 years through my life as an activist and as a former DJ and
a professional gay.
And a professional gay.
I know. Do you have a uniform?
And I then ask some questions about where we are today, because that's also what Pop Baby is about and what I'm about. And it's fun and it's tragic and it's comic, but we just decided, okay, I need to have an honest conversation, and I need to own some of my past that I've never talked about in public. I need to talk about how I was knifed and how I have a scar on my face. We need to talk about being raped, for example, and all of these things. I need to talk about the fact that I've done recreational drugs or whatever, because because, well, here's the thing. A lot of the time, historically, if you dare to actually say that you might have consumed drugs in the past, immediately people have labelled you and have just locked you away as they create all these preconceptions and assumptions about you. You know, it's quite shocking, and a lot of them are reductive and negative and everything, and then you can never escape from that. And I'm going, well, do you know what? First of all, I've done drugs and I've enjoyed them, and also we need to have a grown-up conversation about why people do recreational drugs. In some cases, if I had a choice, I'd rather do recreational drugs than alcohol a lot of the time. Alcohol is a neurotoxin. And sometimes it's a bigger neurotoxin than doing some pills or whatever, you know? So can we just simply talk about that, whatever? And then maybe as a result of talking about it, get into harm reduction, whatever. But here's the great thing about the run in the project. The last night is World AIDS Day. And I'm going, well, this is amazing timing, because there's a huge amount about the AIDS crisis in Ireland and Dublin. The AIDS crisis in Dublin is in the show.
Fantastic.
So I think that's going to be...
I think it's just going to be amazing. I'm sat here with you. We're now an hour and 25 minutes music. You're so engaging. You're so honest. You deliver things in a very unique way. You know, even the stuff around your HIV, the rape, your face. You're such an inspiration. You're a bit of a amazing.
We just have to be real. You know, we have to go back to what we were talking about early on. This idea of finding our voice, finding our truth. Or as Jenny Jennings and Philly McMahon say to me, finding agency, our agency, not urgency. Urgency is well, but agency is really important. And I think in some ways that's culturally and politically it's really subversive, because it's actually you what you're doing is you're putting yourself out there and going, this is me with my failings and everything else, but this is me living my life, and that is a template for other people, because people become emboldened by it. I'm attracted, when I meet randomers, I'm attracted to people who are living, even if they're still failing every now and then, and they're muddling their way through, but they're actively engaged, because we have a simple choice. We can lie down and die and live a half-life.
Absolutely.
And then be full of regrets on our deathbed or whatever, if we're that lucky. Or else we can just get on with the business of living and make it as fabulous as possible. It's not always going to be like that. Oh. And then also surround ourselves with, well, hopefully, some like-minded people who will keep on challenging us, but will also affirm us in this sort of positive world view. They're going, okay, we're all in this together. When I'm lying in bed, or I'm prone to moments of introspection and insecurity and doubt, the thing that gives me hope, the thing that gives me helps me get out of bed some days, when I just get some horrible little depressive moments, the thing that gives me great hope is realizing that I'm in this with other people. That's really important.
Absolutely, that's a powerful one.
Yeah, absolutely.
Tonie, what's the one thing you would like people to take away from this interview after listening about you?
Oh God, you've got the great questions. I'd like to imagine that me just having the chats emboldens people. I think it's always been about, I don't think there's anything particular. The only special thing that I feel that marks me out from some other people, not everybody, is that I just talk about stuff. And rather than internalizing, externalizing it. Externalize our neurosis. Now, I don't mean, by the way, that we have to sort of make a culture of victimhood about how depressed we are, about all of our anxieties, and we have to sort of basically not hold anything back. But I do think that if there are things that are problematic in life, we have to recognize that other people are experiencing them exactly the same. And recognizing that, and also sometimes by just simply making that acknowledgement in public or even in private within our own circles is enough to actually empower other people and then move it on a little bit. And I just think, am I making sense? I'm rambling.
No, I get it.
And I just think, I think that's really important.
Well, I think with all the stuff we talked about today, whether it's the gay activists, the HIV, the recreational drugs, whatever it is, you have to have the conversations.
Big time.
You know, like I'm big into the suicide awareness. It's all about having those conversations. Yeah. It's all about talking about it. And
not being paternalistic either, and having the conversations that are rooted in an honest lived experience, where you cut away the bullshit, you know, and you can just cut to the core of, like, this is where it's at.
Because I think what has the greatest impact, and I work in the hospital, and I'm forever giving presentations of stats and research, but the most significant and most impactful thing ever is people's stories. Yeah. When somebody gets up there and talks from the hearts and explain, whether it be HIV, suicide, blah, 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 they go, wow.
Yeah. Mental health issues, whatever. It's
talk about it.
And here's the thing.
Make it normal.
You saw that playing out during Repeal the 8th. I thought there was something transformative about that process, because in the early days of the campaign, people thought women will just not get up and tell us. Women will not get up in public and talk about having had an abortion, supported by their boyfriend or their husband or whatever else. Or the reason why they chose to have a termination. They won't do that. It's too personal, or it's too traumatic, or it's too shameful, or whatever. And I think some of that process of engagement and the honesty that we saw from women standing up and sharing their stories in all types of public spheres, a lot of that, well, women finding their voice and their agency, but also I think some of it was also they were emboldened by the whole process of marriage equality 3 years before, and we're going, no, just like you said, we tell our stories, and we also, by telling our stories, we can share our own common frailties and everything and help each other out.
Yeah.
Win-win.
We're all in this together. We're all in this shithole, this boat together.
Maybe sometimes we just simply need to step back and have a moment to go and acknowledge that and go, okay, yeah, cut through all the drama and go, yeah, okay. It's like I used to have a trick when I was DJing years ago. I'd be getting a bit scalded at 2 o'clock in the morning, whatever, and it's like 1,000 people, and I'm going, we need to calm this down a moment. And I was down in Cork one night, and I thought, I'm going to put on an Underworld track, but just before that, I'm going to put on 2 minutes, do a complete head fuck, 2 minutes of classical music, just big strings, orchestra, and everyone's going, what the fuck? Or one day I did Steam Train, a choo-choo, just warming up for like 5 minutes, and then layered in the intro to a techno tune or a house tune underneath it. But the idea for that was, I'm using this as an analogy to what you just described. The idea of that was to actually force people on the dance floor to have a moment, especially if they were mangled, to just simply stop and look around and acknowledge each other.
Bit of mindfulness.
And be in the moment to go, hey, we're all here having a good time. Isn't it great? Hi. Now we can get back to the business of fucking getting mad out. Or throwing some shapes or whatever. But you know that analogy of... But that it's the same thing about simply taking a step back. Taking a step back from the bloody... Sometimes the miserableness of our lives and go... Take a deep breath and go, here we are. And I'm here with other people. You know, and we're going to muddle through and whatever, and also I'm going to ramp up my empathy levels and my support levels, and if I have some positives and extra energy to spare, I'm going to put it at somebody else's use or whatever, and we can have a little trade-off here, okay? When I'm really, next time I'm depressed, so give me some of your love or whatever.
Tonie Walsh, you're an incredible human being. You really are a DJ, an activist, just downright good person. Thanks so much for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me.
I mean that from the bottom of my heart. I could sit here talking to you for hours. Just engaging.
Quite lovely. By the way, for all of you listening outside, there's this dappled sunlight coming in through the blinds, and it's creating a sort of halo effect on Matt in front of me here, okay? He's covered with this sort of heavenly glow behind him on a Sunday afternoon.
There's nothing Jesus-like going on around here, and there was no drugs took in the making of this podcast. I just want to...
from the coffee.
Yeah. Tonie Walsh.
Thanks for having me, Matt.
The godfather of gays. Thanks very much for coming on the show. Okay, so there wraps up another tremendous interview. As always, I'd like to thank my supports, Niall Riley from Rooney Media. Niall has been in the graphic design business the last 20 years and producing quality work. For the last couple of years, they've been the chief graphic design for the college prospectus at UCD. I've been using his services the last, 10-15 years, producing posters for health and fitness stuff, and always produces quality work, so check those guys out. Also, my old pal Carolyn Harvey from ISA Nutrition, for anybody interested in dropping body fat, gaining muscle, maintaining a healthy body weight, getting rid of some nutritional ailments. She's your woman. If you're also interested in competing bodybuilding competition, male or female, I would recommend her. I am currently working with Carolyn Harvey, and the success has been phenomenal. I have done a review already, and I plan to do more. But if nutrition and strength conditioning, that area is something that you'd like to get coaching or advice on, I would check it out, and the prices are really, really good, better than a lot that's out there. So I recommend you check her out. Also, my old crew, Kevin Doyle, sound editing and just producing and just support, absolutely legend Kevin. And my old mate Aaron Keogh, social media. Lads, you are brilliant. The team would be lost without you. Okay, so that just leaves me to thank my listeners. Thanks a lot for listening. I will urge you, please share this with family and friends. We're on iTunes, SoundCloud, Spotify, all the kind of podcast mediums that are out there. We're on them right the way across. We also have a YouTube channel, so check us out on that. Please go on to iTunes, please subscribe, please leave a delicious review. We love it, absolutely love it. So that's all the plugging I'm going to do for this podcast. As always, I will say to you, please show yourself compassion. Please spend some time with love and kindness in your life, because if you are kind and loving to yourself, you will project that to the rest of the world. And if we all could do that a small percentage of our day, the place would be a nice place to live. Right, wherever you are in the world, mind yourself. Have a great day. Bye bye.